Hey everyone, this is Alan McKay. Welcome to episode 44. I'm doing another solo episode on creating passive income, how to earn money on the side and create more freedom to go after your dream jobs and have a bit more financial security to take those bigger risks. So this is it, guys. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Alan McKay Podcast. Alan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Alan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Alan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on alanmckay.com.
Hey everyone, this is Alan McKay. Welcome to episode 44. I'm really excited that there's actually been 44 episodes. I think that's so freaking cool. So again, thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. It really means a lot to me, and I hope that there's another 44 and beyond. But for now, I'm going to be doing an episode which I've wanted to do for a while, and on top of that, I've been getting a lot of requests or questions about this sort of stuff. Obviously, you might notice that there's been a lot of solo episodes, at least 3 now. That was more to kind of make up, I think, for doing so many interviews. And at the same time, I've been getting so much feedback, so many questions about a lot of this stuff that I figure it's better to kind of answer it to the masses rather than just fire out like a really in-depth response to one person. So there's been a lot that I want to cover, and I've already had a plan for quite a long time now as to a lot of the subjects I've wanted to work on, and I've been kind of working in the background for a lot of these, or on a lot of these, for the past couple of weeks or months. So it's definitely been something that I've enjoyed doing, but it's also very specifically tailored to a lot of you who are asking these questions. One of the subjects that I find can be a little bit taboo, and at the same time, a lot of people don't really know where to start with this subject, but I think that we all can value and get a lot from this, and that is how to make money on the side, or how to get a side income, how to earn money online, how to get extra cash, how to monetize on your career, however you want to put it. And that is basically that you have talents and you've got bills to pay. Usually we work our 9 to 5, whatever we're doing, but how do you make a bit of extra money? Is there ways that you can kind of moonlight on the side, doing side freelance or selling things, or is there some other way that you can be doing some really cool stuff? How do you make cash? And this is such a big subject, but at the same time, it's something that I've got a heck of a lot of experience doing, and I've been selling and doing stuff online since 2004. And before that, I mean, I've been writing tutorials and been contributing, and I've been doing all of that since 1997. And around 2004, I released my first ever training DVD, and that was my way of kind of just getting everything I know and putting it out there as basically one gigantic solution to everything that I knew to do with 3D and visual effects. And this thing was about 40 hours long. It was huge. And I remember I put that out, and the very day that I put it out, because again, it was like $30 for 40 hours of work, the president of Nomon called me up, Alex Alvarez, and instantly was like, come out to Nomon, we need to talk right now. And I ended up meeting with him and Eric Hansen and had a really big chat about reproducing that DVD through Nomon as like a 10 DVD set. So that was pretty interesting just to have that chat. And, you know, it was one of those things that obviously for some people, they could see the potential of like, this thing is huge. We could release it as, I guess, you know, hypothetically 4 hours per DVD over 10 DVDs. For me, it was more, I enjoyed doing it, and I'd always loved contributing. I'd always loved sharing. And for me, it was more just a way to kind of get it all out there. And I could find a way to justify taking a month off to devote all of my time to putting this all together. And it took me months in the end to do, but it was well worth it. And so it wasn't about the money. It was more about just putting it out as a solution for everyone, just to pay $30 and get it shipped out, and, you know, right away you get to learn and do the thing. And it's been really great because, pretty much everyone I speak to has at some point gotten to watch a lot of those earlier DVDs, which are really embarrassing now because they're so terrible. I actually remember when we did the episode with Andrew Kramer, even he brought that up, and the production quality was definitely horrible, but it was, for me, I still think that the content was really good. And a lot of the guys at Blur, for instance, over the time, I've gone there and they've always kind of had a hard time getting effects artists. And I remember at some point I went in there just to hang out, but I was also asking, do you have anything coming up? Do you need any help? Just as a good excuse to come to LA and hang out a bit longer. And I remember them saying, like, you know what, for the first time ever, we have like too many effects people, and it's because they've done all of your training. And so we've got all these guys just like pour in here that have all kind of like gotten to learn the foundations of what they're doing from all the training DVDs I was putting out, which is really cool. And even when I was at Blur, a few of the character animators, actually one of the character animation supervisor on the new Minions movie, I remember he had like a couple of days downtime and he picked up one of my DVDs. And this is just really funny to listen to because he had never done effects in his life and he was knocking out some really cool stuff in literally a day. So, I mean, it's just kind of fascinating to kind of see the results you can get from kind of sharing knowledge. And I've always been a really big fan of that. It's never really been about the money and everything else. I will say for me, I've definitely made a bit of a shift in the past year. Like I said before, I've wanted to make 2015 about giving back. And I've taken most of the year off specifically to help with that, to do a lot of live classes, webinars, focus on the podcast, do all this stuff. And I don't even think that would be possible before, but of course, doing the mentorship and a few other things, it's meant that at least I've got some kind of side income to allow me to kind of keep going while I'm working on everything else. And I think for a lot of people, like we all kind of get those situations where our current job is paying the bills, we're getting by, but it would be nice to have a little bit of extra money somehow to get a bit more freedom. And, especially earlier in our career, we mightn't have the money that we want. And it's always difficult because, I talk a lot about trying to, I mentioned the second train theory last episode, and there's a lot of that where you want to branch out, you want to do something daring, but there's always that fear of what if, and everyone has those illogical fears, but money and finances is always going to be one of those. It's definitely more of a present and usually a sensible fear to have. And that is, okay, if I quit my job and go chase my dream, I don't have any money saved up. So if I fail, then I'm screwed. So having some way to kind of get that extra bit of money to build those initial savings, to have that comfort margin, so then you can get out there and chase your dreams is important. And at the same time, if you get good, consistent income doing that side income, that is definitely something that allows you to say, okay, well, maybe I will go and focus on my dream. Maybe it's making a short film. Maybe it's trying out to get into visual effects or whatever it's going to be, animation. And by having that extra bit of money coming in, it might only be $500 a week or $1,000 a month. It doesn't need to be much, but it's just a little bit, which might help make rent and everything else a little bit cheaper. I do remember for the longest time, when I did sell DVDs, and I'll go into a lot of different stuff here, but when I used to sell those, it wasn't ever a lot of money, but maybe, $500 a month, but that's still, great. And like for me, I just made sure that I never touched it. That money actually is the other way around. Sorry, I apologize. It was more the other way around where I decided any fun that I had would be with that income. So whatever, if I wanted to go travel or do something like that, then I might have to wait a few months, but that, $300 here and $500 there, that all adds up. And so eventually I would have a free vacation in my eyes. All the money that I worked for physically would go to bills and would go into savings or whatever else. But this other thing that, every couple of years I would put out some training, and, when that did make some money, that would be something that would become like my free money to actually guilt-free spend on, whatever I wanted to watch or whatever I wanted to do. So, having that freedom definitely can help. And what I want to go through is more just kind of brushing a few ideas past in terms of like what types of ways that you can make money online. I mentioned selling DVDs, but there are so many different ways, and probably in a lot of ways, better ways to actually make money. And it's more about finding what's right for you and what really works for you, as well as more some of these things that might initially start out as like, I'm going to make some money on the side, might end up becoming your career, because as things progress, you might start to see that as your second train. It might start to catch up, and suddenly your day job, which you're really stressed about, and your other job are starting to kind of make the same amount of money. And you might start to realize, you know what, I've been doing like this 3D printing on the side or whatever, and now I'm getting enough clients. What if I took a few months off? What if I tried to devote more time to this and see if it takes off? You got to take those chances, but if you do the what if and actually think about the logic behind it, it's like, okay, well, what if I did? What is the worst that could happen? If I take 2 months off, I've already got an income coming in from this, so I can work on making it better. If it doesn't work, you set a timeline, you go back. I actually did that end of last year after working on Halo. I decided I'm going to take a bit of time off, and I'm just going to focus entirely on prepping the mentorship, which was about 4 or 5 months for me just to get to the point where I was ready to launch it. And that was always one of those things that if it didn't sell well, then January I'd be going back to work and I'd have a mentorship plus the work to cover. Of course, like the mentorship that I'm doing, it's huge. It's a 1 year long thing that I'm doing live classes all the time. I did a 2-hour live lesson yesterday, and the day before that I did 9 hours. So as you can imagine, it's pretty brutal. I had over 350 students in those sessions that I was doing. So, that's the sort of thing that can get pretty intense, but it's just a matter of kind of finding your right audience, and there's lots of different ways to go about that. Okay, so first of all, I just want to mention that I'm going to freeball this. I am in a bit of a rush. I'm about to go do a shoot in downtown LA. And on top of that, I decided while I'm in downtown LA, I might actually make a weekend out of it. So I'm actually staying in a hotel at the Standard Hotel in downtown. It's got an amazing rooftop. It's got a big pool. It's freaking epic, and it's actually in the middle of the city. So rather than being surrounded by some like amazing view, you literally have all these gigantic buildings towering down around you, but it looks really amazing. And I decided, because the shoot's running quite late, that I might as well just make a night out of it, and that way I'll be around in the morning and I can kind of have a relaxing Sunday rather than coming all the way back to Santa Monica and then coming back out again the next day. And because of that, I've got to run out the door in the next hour. So I just want to kind of knock this out really quick. But this is something that, like I mentioned before, I've got a lot of experience with. And in the more recent years, it hasn't been just in terms of like, selling DVDs, writing articles, public speaking, all that stuff. I've actually ended up consulting. I've mentioned this a little bit here and there, or at least hinted towards it, that I've been hired to do a lot of consulting for millionaire mastermind groups in how to sell products, how to position yourself as an expert, branding. There's a lot of different areas here. So this is something that I've always thought, I've been pretty successful. I've done pretty well in my career doing visual effects, but to actually branch out into an area that I've not got a background in, it's not like I've been doing this for 20 years. I kind of, in terms of that audience, I kind of came out of nowhere, but have gotten the attention of people I mentioned. Obviously, I've mentioned Neil Strauss before, but I've also had a lot of other really big name marketers, as well as mastermind groups that I've been contributing to over time. And it's been pretty phenomenal to get to meet a lot of people in completely different areas, but also kind of talk with them and work on launching products and helping them with a lot of their positioning. So this is one thing that I feel I'm just as competent in as I am with sitting, behind a computer or being on set doing visual effects. And so I'm just going to rattle some stuff off right now. But again, this is something that I want to mention. If you feel like this is something you want to hear more about, I have an endless amount of information I can give on this, because I've been doing this for other groups outside of design, visual effects, all that kind of stuff for quite some time over the past 2 years. And, again, I think it's definitely one of those taboo things. And I have actually been testing a lot of audiences, doing everything from surveys and everything else. And it's kind of funny, but artists love to make art, but you kind of mention, hey, are you interested in making more money? Or are you interested in, kind of some kind of passive side income? A lot of people are like, I don't care about that. I just want to make money. Interestingly, though, I've also met the other side of it where I've got people who work in this industry, and I've said like, I've talked with them. They've actually said, hey, I want to make more money. And I've given advice like, well, right now, because you haven't really, let's say, established your name, your title, your credits, this, and this. However, you've got really good rapport at the studio you're at, you're doing really well. Why don't you go and ask to be promoted to a lead, or what you can do to work your way to that? And that way you could get a lead title on the next project you're on. That will use some clout. So the next studio you go to, you're a lead, you can negotiate instantly, maybe an extra $15,000, $20,000 perhaps, and work on part of your new package to get trained up as a supervisor over 2 years or whatever. And that way, suddenly you can jump to a higher rate. You could even charge $1,000 a day as a supervisor at various studios. Of course, that's a 2-year plan, but with the instant pay bump, usually of about 10, 15K. But instantly it's like, no, I just want to make money. Like, tell me how to make cash. So, you've definitely got to put in the work to get the rewards. And there's always going to be a strategy behind this. Now, as I mentioned, I've been selling products. I've been doing all that kind of stuff. There's lots of different options in terms of making cash. And I think it's more about exploring where you best fit into all this. And I want this to be as kind of broad as I can. So it isn't like you've got to be a 3D modeler or an effects guy or something. If you are a Photoshop queen or a compositing king or whatever your background is, you can definitely make ways to monetize a lot of what you do. The biggest thing is, I would say, is ask your friends, like say, hey, like when you look at my skill sets, what do you best know me for? Like, where do you think I really stand out? Or what's the first skill set that you think of, or the talent that I have that comes to mind? Usually what you think that you stand out as mightn't necessarily be what they actually think about. So this is important because it's good when other people can start to recognize your skill sets, because typically these are the ones that you probably aren't thinking of and probably are going to get the most recognition when you shop them around. So you might think that, you're an amazing lighting artist, but everyone else thinks like, wow, you do these really wacky CG characters or whatever it is. I know so many friends like Raf Grizzetti, if you are the other guys, that they do phenomenal creature work. You give them a demon and a ZBrush and a Wacom pen, he'll, for instance, knock out like really amazing work. And there are so many situations, I know so many people who slowly start to fall into that category, and suddenly they are that person. I'm definitely feeling that right now, where I've put out some Ash training content, like creating characters burning apart recently, and I'm actually now working with the guys I did God of War with, because they have this other project, really high profile, that is very similar in terms of like people turning to Ash. And it's just one of those things, like I remember meeting with Luma over in Santa Monica and having a big meeting about vampires. I think I mentioned this before, but it's got to the point where I've done so many vampire films I don't want to do anymore. And it's one of those things that you can fall into categories very easily. So fire, obviously for me, doing a lot of live action VFX souping. There's certain areas that I've done a lot of, and it's usually you're a victim of your own success. But that's a good thing. Why not exploit that? So if you find that you're really well established and you get a big following because you draw really cute cartoony characters, or you really enjoy doing this comic strip on the side or whatever else, find what it is that really defines you, that you get a lot of interest in, and then really start to hammer that big time. Now, in terms of making money, I mean, there's definitely a lot of different areas. One is going to be selling assets. So if you're a modeler, if you're a 3D person, you can sell your 3D assets online. There's plenty of places to do it. Turbo Squid is obviously one of them. I'm really good friends with Bo Pashal, who's the president of Turbo Squid. I've actually thought about bringing him on here just because Turbo Squid's definitely got a lot of cool things coming up that they're doing. So I thought it might be fun to bring him on to give some insight. Plus, I just love chatting to the guy. He's awesome, really good family man. And he's got a wealth of knowledge, and TurboSquid has, especially selling online models, has definitely become a really big repository for people to post their work. And what you'll do is, let's say that you model a character that you think is really cool. Why not go and sell it, and why not make some money from doing that? As long as you own the rights to the model, that's going to be the big thing. If you don't and you go sell it, there can always be legal issues with that. So, if you go model Thor or scan Thor from Avengers and decide, hey, I've got this cool model, you can't really go online and say, all right, I'm going to sell that. I actually have a head scan of Freddy Krueger from when we did Jason vs. Freddy. And, that was like, I just had to, I never planned to use it for anything, but I just had to keep that model because it's so cool. And like, especially all the crevices on his face and everything else, it just looked really amazing. But when you own something, when it's your own content, and this is for everything here, you can go online and you can sell that, and you could charge anywhere from, I've seen, models for $10 to $1,000. And people need that stuff. And the thing that you have to keep in mind, if you think, well, I'd never pay $1,000 for a model. Let's say, I know that there's a White House model. It's like a really detailed landscape of the White House. Now, if I were doing a production and we needed the White House to have UFOs blow it up and also aircraft carriers crash into it, whatever we're doing, that's definitely something that if I were to hire someone to model that, that could literally take weeks. And if you think of an artist rate, let's say is $2,000 a week, and they've got to model this for a month, that's $8,000. If it's 2 months, if it's like a really detailed model, that could be, close to $20,000. Or you're hiring multiple people. There's a lot to go through. So $1,000 is extremely cost effective. I actually wish a lot more producers thought like that, because there's a lot of ways you could save money just by thinking more about, like, instead of the knee-jerk reaction about, whoa, that's expensive, to, okay, how much would it cost if we did it ourselves? In the reverse, there's times when things can be expensive. Artbeats, for instance, artbeats.com, they sell a lot of stock footage, and I've found it to always be ridiculously expensive, where we'd want to go buy a piece of footage of like a water droplet hitting some water, and it'd literally be thousands of dollars, and you just go and knock it out in a day yourself. So, you can get a lot more control that way too. So it just depends on what you're doing. But going online, selling something for, $200 for a model, that is something that if you make a few models and you sell them on there, you could end up making, potentially $1,000 a month or $500 a month, whatever it is. And that adds up over time. I've got a few friends who do that, and the way that they described it is, you're not going to get rich and retire off of it, but it's nice to get a paycheck, like a check in the mail, and, for whatever amount of money, a few $100 or $1,000, every once in a while. And that can be your new toy that you want to buy or whatever else. That's a good way to look at this stuff. And for me, I will just say that, like, the biggest kind of big change I ever had in my life was the first time I ever made money online. Because when you literally create something and then it goes into a machine where it just starts generating real income, that's a big mindset change right there, that you're not physically working for something and then the reward is that you get payment for it. Instead, you do something and then it can become passive income, meaning reoccurring money that just kind of continually generates. And making models, that sort of thing, definitely can be really effective for that. TurboSquid has changed their pricing models more recently, but I know for the longest time it was basically 50-50. It would be that you would put your stuff on there, they would sell it, and they'd split 50-50 down the line. I think it's changed a little bit now, so I think it's more in the favor of the artist. So maybe it starts at 50-50, but the more kind of rapport you build up with TurboSquid, the more you might get upgraded to different services. So eventually you might end up with 65% and they make 35%. I know initially it's 50-50. I was the only person on TurboSquid getting a higher percentage, but at the same time, I had the highest selling product on TurboSquid at the time. So they ended up deciding to kind of balance it out a little bit more in my favor, which was kind of cool. But either way, like I said, you're not trying to necessarily get rich off of this. I think it's important to make sure you sell what you're worth. But for anyone who is going to say like, well, I don't like that they get 50%, like what are they doing? They're running a website. You got to keep in mind the back end that goes into this, or I should say both the back end and the front end. Basically, they're running a company. It's their company. They're doing all the hard work. So right away, they're going to be more liable. They're doing all advertising, all the costs and everything, paying employees to maintain it all. On top of that, you're getting exposure because unless you have 1 million Twitter followers and you can self-promote, then they're ideal because they're going to be the ones selling your stuff. So people probably wouldn't see your stuff otherwise. So having it on there means that they're going to stumble across your work and want to buy it. And that is also a way that you can get a bit of a following. So it's really worthwhile basically to let them kind of run that stuff, because that way you're getting more recognition. You're getting to sell stuff that otherwise you would have a hard time selling by yourself. If you do have 1 million followers, then there's definitely stuff that I can talk to you about in terms of how to sell your stuff, how to kind of build up that whole e-commerce platform to actually get stuff sold. So, it totally depends on what you're doing and what your end goal is, but keep that in mind that they might be taking some of the money, but at the same time, they're more liable for it. I had a big conversation recently with someone who works in design, and she was saying how she doesn't like the fact that this company is charging all this money. This is a classic conversation, but they're charging thousands of dollars and they're paying me a couple $100. I could go and do this on my own and I'll make all the money myself. And the first thing I said is, like, you've got to understand that, first of all, they had the initiative to launch their own company. And on top of that, they put up all the money. They got it all started. I mean, it's one of those classic things. It's easier to talk down to other people who are actually going and doing something than it is to do something yourself. But in this situation, it's more about they went and had the initiative to go and do something big. And they take all the risk. They get everything going. They do something scary. They hire employees. They go and do all the outreach. They find all these people. They take on all the risk doing it. And the thing is, at the end of the day, if you mess up as an employee, okay, you might get a slap on the wrist. But they're the ones who are liable. They're the ones who get sued. They're the ones who have to fix everything if it all goes wrong on their own cost. So at the end of the day, there's a lot that goes into it. Plus, hiring salespeople, hiring and renting a facility, buying all the materials, like all this stuff costs money. So there's all this stuff that you probably don't think of initially, but there's a lot that goes into any kind of brick and mortar business. Selling stuff virtual online, the overhead is less, which is great, but that's definitely one of the big things. Of course, since then, it's funny that there was a situation where she launched her business, which was great, but with any job, some things can go wrong. And of course, suddenly the profit that she was going to make goes out the window because if a mistake gets made, then you're liable for it. And that's exactly the thing. So even though you might be paid less than the person who's running the company and making, what looks like millions of dollars or whatever, you got to look into all the risk and everything else they're taking on as well. And some people are actually more happy being an employee than wanting to run their own company, just because they're more wired like that. And I said wired, not weird, but they basically want to find a nice, comfortable environment that they can be an employee, they can have stability, and they can do their work. Not everyone needs to be a boss. So, you don't need to look at people all weird when they say they want to run stuff. I've mentioned this before, but my old roommate was the one who founded Halfbrick, which makes video games like Fruit Ninja and all those other ones. So those guys are worth millions, tens of millions of dollars now. And I remember when I first met my roommate, and I was talking to him, he's one of my students, and I remember him telling me that he doesn't want to work for people, he wants to be his own boss. And I remember, for me, I was looking for that stability, and I kind of looked at him a bit weird, like, I'd rather a job, rather than going out and taking all the risk. Of course, things change over time, but it was kind of interesting to see that and then see where he went. Like, having that mindset is definitely important, but not for everyone. But keep that in mind, and that's why TurboSquid or these other companies are going to take a percentage, which might seem high, but they're the ones who are actually going to get all the sales and get you a lot of income that you probably wouldn't get otherwise, as well as exposure and everything else. And forgive me if I'm a little bit tongue-tied. I have literally had way too much coffee this morning. So a couple of things I'm just going to mention, though, about all of this is that one of the big things is you're going to get exposure. There are so many benefits to selling your stuff and getting your name out there. And also in terms of selling, I could definitely rattle off a lot of ways that you will get a higher success rate from selling your stuff in terms of just, even your thumbnail, like your graphic that people click on to see what your model is. There's definitely ways to get more attention than other people would, and therefore more sales. But on top of that, you're going to get a lot more attention from people when they see your stuff. So even just having a link back to your site, stuff like that means that they could go and check out more. And I haven't seen it too often, but the ones who do, when I see it, I'm like, smart thinking, because they can say, hey, if you're interested, you can buy the models for cheaper on my website, as well as a larger, more up-to-date selection. And people are like, okay, cool, I'll go there for the cheaper stuff. What they're really doing is basically saying, hey, if you want, we can scam TurboSquid and I'll give you the model for 20% cheaper because I'll make 100% of the profit. So it kind of screws TurboSquid, but or whoever the company is, but that's something well worth mentioning, is like people do crafty stuff like that. I don't really recommend doing that because I think it's better for a couple of reasons to sell your stuff directly on the site, even if you're losing out on a little bit of the money, because what's going to happen is you're going to get higher ranked. And the more you get ranked, the more your stuff's going to be visible, especially because it sorts by best selling by default, I believe. Otherwise, like, that's how typically people will always filter everything. In addition to that, like, if they can see that you've made 200,000 sales or whatever it's going to be, then that's going to give you a lot of clout as well. So just keep that in mind. It's better to sell on the site, but sending a link back to your website is very important as well. So that way they can get to know who you are, bookmark your work. I've talked about that in many episodes about having that base that everything links back to, because that way you're not a model that got sold on TurboSquid, you're actually an artist, and they can start to follow you and maybe even contact you and say, hey, we love your stuff. It wasn't actually exactly what we wanted. Can you do a custom model for us? Can we hire you? And that way you start to get leads being generated from the work that you're doing. And I actually see this a lot. There are many, many times, and I've spoken to a lot of different people who do sell models online, and a lot of the time people go to check out their stuff, to buy it, and they end up hiring them because that way they get exactly what they need in terms of the mapping and everything else, like exactly. So it ends up being a really good lead magnet to attract clients in. Now, what if you're not a 3D person? What if you're a designer? What if you're more into motion graphics or Photoshop? You can still do so much with this. In fact, I think you've got more options this way too. The only problem, especially Photoshop, is that it's a very oversaturated market. And I'm just going to talk about this for a moment. I talk about in a few episodes about being in high demand, low supply, and essentially how to evaluate your market to find out where you're positioned best, where there's a hole in the market that you can fill. And I will be talking more about this throughout this episode, but this is something really important to think about. If you look at a lot of the stuff out there, you can start to get an idea of like, wow, a lot of it looks the same. How can I do something that stands out? And all it takes is that one thing to really get you shot up to the top. In terms of like selling stuff, Envato is definitely one of the big places. I've spent probably tens of thousands of dollars at this point on material from Envato just because it's great content that you can quickly grab and utilize. And most of the stuff is really cheap, which says if I've spent at least close to $10,000 on material from Envato, then it definitely means that I've bought a lot of it. And that's just it. It's very, very popular because it's a large suite of websites of different types. So Audio Jungle, Graphic River, I can't name them off the top of my head, but Theme Forest, there's a lot of really great ones there. And so if you're buying stock music, stock sounds, whatever you want, After Effects themes, I've definitely used a lot of those, as well as Photoshop files, like for flyers, for PowerPoint presentations, I've used a couple there. In fact, PowerPoint presentations are really great. Website, WordPress themes, all that good stuff. You can buy stuff there for really cheap, and so it's definitely one of the bigger ones. Now, I think the best thing to do is to go to all these websites, and if you sort it by most popular or most sold, that will give you a better idea of like what sells, like what's popular, what's in high demand. And of course, the generic stuff isn't going to sell as much as the stuff that really kicks butt. So if you start to model the successes of all these successful ones, in other words, start to look at what's working about them, what's not working, you can start to get a better idea of all right, what do I need to do to make my product stand out? To, how are they marketing? How are they doing stuff? So just to give you an idea, there are a lot of different sections. I should actually bring up the site just so I can get a refresher. But again, I'm just doing it off the top of my head here. But if you want to do flyers for parties and stuff like that, you can go on there and you can quickly grab stuff. There's even Photoshop actions, which blew me away, because there would be, let's say, doing a really cool sketch effect or other types of effects. You could buy them for like $5. But if you create a really complex, really cool professional action inside of Photoshop, you can sell that as well as instructions on how to use it. And the cool thing is that if you look at Photoshop, everything else, yes, they're very oversaturated. And by oversaturated, I mean that there are many people, like thousands of people doing this stuff. So your competition is a lot more steep. You won't make as many sales. However, at the same time, because it's so oversaturated, it means that there's a much bigger audience. So in other words, Photoshop is so standard. You look at all the industries, you're going to get a lot of sales because you'll have thousands of people visiting there. Whereas like visual effects is only going to be a few hundred or tens. That's one thing I'll mention is, like, again, to evaluate your industry. The industry that I primarily work in terms of like 3D, visual effects, whatever, there is only a handful of people. So if you ever think you're going to get rich selling like a training product, let's say Fume Effects or something like that, you got to understand that, first of all, it's 3D. So if you put in the category of 3D, 3D is not a big industry compared to other industries. Like Photoshop, for instance, is going to be 1,000 different markets. But 3D and then film, so then it's a smaller industry. So take away, for the most part, games, architecture, medical visualization, everything else. Film is actually a pretty tiny industry in terms of the world and occupation. So then you go 3ds Max. 3ds Max out of Max Maya Houdini has definitely sold more licenses than any of the others. However, if we're looking specifically for feature film, it's probably somewhere in the middle. It's pretty comparable. So suddenly you got to split your market between Houdini and Maya, everything else. It probably comes out about 40%. I'd say 40% is a good guess, maybe 50%. It's still sold really heavily, but you're splitting the industry there. Then you go effects, and suddenly you're splintering it even more. It's very tiny. And then you're going for a plugin inside of that. So Fume Effects, let's say. Suddenly the market is minute. There's a very small amount of people who are potentially going to buy your product and everything else. So I mention that because you've got to look at what's popular. And the more you kind of get analytical about the stuff, the better. So you can look at what sold, what didn't sell, everything else. Like I said, I, for the longest time, have been selling stuff online, doing all that. It's not necessarily profitable. I think that a lot of the DVDs and things I sold, for the most part, didn't make an extensive amount of money. It was just, I could never live off of that money by itself, but it was definitely something that would be a nice bit of pocket change, considering the amount of time I put into that. I definitely have a different philosophy with making my products, which is I prefer to, again, sorry, cotton mouth from all this coffee. I prefer to over-deliver than under-deliver. And I've had this philosophy since my first DVD, where 40 hours on a $30 DVD, even now, you look at most of the online courses, they all sell for about $650 to $1,000. And that's usually for about a 6-week course. Whereas most of my courses that I run are about the same price, but they're 6 months to a year. Okay, so they're literally 1,000% or more, 1,000 to 2,000% more content than you're going to get, as well as interaction from me. I'll get onto that later on about automation and everything else. But again, I like to actually interact with my audience. Like I said, I did 9 hours Thursday, 2 hours on Friday of live classes, interacting with everyone, as well as like going on forums throughout the week, emails, private Facebook groups, all that stuff. So, that's stuff that you're usually not going to get with other live courses too. So I just wanted to mention, like, you got to figure out like how you want to do it. With me, I definitely over deliver, which means that you're doing, sometimes 1,000% more work. So you got to figure out, okay, well, what is your motivation? For me, I like to share and interact and help others. Maybe you're doing it because you want to build your name and get more recognition. So maybe that's a good way to do it. Or maybe you want to make money. And if you do, you got to figure out what's best. maybe I shouldn't kind of endorse this, but recently I visited a few of the like piracy websites just to kind of see what's out there. And that was actually kind of interesting because, I don't condone piracy at all. And definitely my stuff, along with everyone else's, does get pirated. It's, for me, like, I'm not going to get bitter about it. Like, I do see some people actually get all like fired up about it. It's not great when it happens, but you got to face reality that it is going to happen. For me, especially now, like, I actually am making my living off of what I'm doing. Like, I took a year off just to focus entirely on this stuff. So if I ever did see my material on there, it would pretty much break my heart, I'm sure. But it's not good when it happens, but at the same time, it's going to happen from time to time. And all I can say is, if you enjoy it and you really thought that you benefited a lot from it, which I hope you do if you are buying it, well, then I would recommend, purchase it when you have the money, just because there have been times definitely in my career where initially when, I'm a teenager, I haven't bought stuff, but obviously when I had the money later on, I definitely went out there and was like, okay, time to cough up the money now that I'm making money from this, or it's benefited me greatly. But everyone's going to react differently to that sort of thing. But yeah, for me these days is how I make a living. So it's, I think that if I ever did get hit really hard with like piracy, that sort of thing, then I probably wouldn't be able to do it anymore, because it's literally, basically stopping me from making a living. So I just have to change direction, I think. But what was interesting by looking at that was it's a really interesting way to focus. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but it is like is a really good way to focus on seeing very specifically what people are accessing, because you can sort things out by how many downloads, who's actively sharing stuff right now. So that was interesting, just as a more social experiment to kind of see. I mean, for me, I just wanted to kind of check to see whether I had any material kind of floating around that was recent, and thankfully there isn't. But at the same time, like, it became like a nice resource to actually just kind of at a glance take a look at and see what's popular. So for instance, if you sorted everything in 3D or 2D, 3D would be V-Ray. V-Ray instantly becomes the number one thing that everyone is using right now. 3ds Max, Maya, V-Ray, and then other things start to trickle in later on. So you can start to kind of pick up what are the trends. And obviously Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, when you start to go into 2D. So I don't, I'm not condoning that sort of thing, but at the same time, I will say that like that is one way that you can start to look at what's popular. And then you could start to think, okay, well, from there, let me go and look around the web and see whether Nomon, CG Society, whoever else, like who has courses on these things. You can start to look at the contents and start to think, okay, well, where is there a big hole in the market? Like, where is there something that isn't being done too well? One of the big things I'm working on right now is some new Fume Effects 4 training, as well as RealFlow 2015. So those are two things that I've been heavily tied to since the beginning. And I feel like I've been doing that so long that I've got a good niche carved out in those areas. So for me, I've held off putting out new content just because, especially Fume Effects, there isn't other stuff out there. And I think, without sounding cocky, but like, I think that I've definitely oversaturated that market enough that, I think most people would just think it isn't sensible to put other material out. And of course, Fume Effects 4 just about to be released. That's something I'll be revisiting again, but it's more just because I haven't updated since Fume Effects 2 any material, just because I put out enough that it'd just be ridiculous otherwise to do that. But now there's enough that's changed that I want to revisit that. But you find the things that work really well. Like, there's definitely a lot of holes in both 2D and 3D that you could jump into. But I think the better thing is to look at trends and everything else and find like what are some ones you can exploit. So with Photoshop and After Effects, like I said, going to Envato, a place like that, you can use their marketplace as a way to sell a lot of your stuff. So if you do a really cool, especially I think for TV and design, like doing TV IDs and promos, you can get that piece and then put it online to sell to other people. So that way they could change a few things and add their own source material and then, repurpose it into their own content. So you can start to sell a lot of your stuff. Because if you're doing 3-4 jobs a week, which is pretty typical in motion graphics, then over time you're going to generate a lot of content. And if each of the piece of that content is actually selling for $15, $25, $40, that can over time generate a lot of money. at the same time, Photoshop, like I said, there's a lot of different things, as well as even just logos, things like that. So you could go and do artwork, stock clip art, things like that. When I say like stock clip art, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be like boring corporate stuff, but you might design some really cool things, or you might just enjoy being an illustrator and doing a lot of that vector art, and that's just a way to make some money on the side. Same thing with doing photography. You can go like deposit photos or Shutterstock, a lot of other different places. There are so many that you could sell your stuff. And so this is something, again, where every single sale that you make will actually generate income. So there's a lot of those that can be really beneficial, but that's just on selling a couple of like your assets and that sort of thing. And again, even with effects or compositing, all that sort of stuff, you definitely can find ways. Like you could write scripts. I know a lot of people who have developed scripts. Even in After Effects, you can sell scripts. There's a few that I've bought. But on top of that, you can find side jobs to do. So obviously doing freelance on the side, it doesn't need to be like you're going to take on a big movie production or something that's going to weigh you down. You can just do quick jobs here and there. Like, okay, go model this, or I need to get a title sequence done for my short film. I'm paying, $300. For doing that, like there's websites like 99 Designs, which has a lot of different areas you can do a lot of stuff on. I've recently had a friend of mine experimenting with that, and she's been making pretty good profit actually. Yesterday there's one job was $300. You do 2 jobs a day, or it's usually they'll happen over a few days, so you can kind of cycle through 6 ongoing jobs, and you end up making maybe $2,000 a week. And that can end up becoming a full-time job just by doing that. And the way it works is that you basically all pitch on people's jobs, and you basically submit your work, and they kind of upvote your stuff. So it's not always going to guarantee that you'll get the job, but when you do, and if you're good with your work, then, and as you get better and more consistent at it, it can become really profitable. But then there's stuff like going on Elance, Odesk. There's other ones out there. They're especially good for 2D rather than 3D, because you're not going to go on there and someone's going to say, model me a vampire or whatever it's going to be. It's usually going to be more smaller gigs, but that's a place that people will post a job, and it's kind of like the classifieds. You go on there and you basically say, here's all my previous work. I think I can do the job. I think you should give it to me. And they decide on who to award the work, and then they go do it. So it's a lot less risk than 99 Designs, where you're literally competing almost to the very end to get their work. This way it's more, they decide who to assign the job to. They pay the money to an escrow. In other words, they pay the money online to Odesk or whoever it is. So that money kind of sits there, and that way you know that you're not going to get screwed over. That way when you do the job, you get awarded the work. And if for whatever reason you don't do the job, then they don't have to pay. A dispute gets put in, so then it kind of goes through that whole process. So either way, it's a lot more safe, because it's not like you're going to do the job and then they're going to be like, aha, I'm going to disappear off the web now. Or vice versa, like you take the money and run. So it's kind of like a safe way to be able to work. That can be pretty interesting. And I've hired over the years, I've hired a few people from Elance. I've never used Odesk, but it's pretty much the same thing. And there's a few different websites like that out there. But again, I've had times where I'm like, hey, I just quickly need to get this built. Who can do it for me? And people jump on and say, I'll do it. And then, I pay them $200, or I pay them sometimes $2,000 or $3,000 to do a job. So one of my original websites, I originally did through that. And this year I've been trying to rebuild my entire website, because I've never in the history of my life had a website I was happy with. And I finally decided to hire a full-time designer for a couple of months to design the website that I want and I've always wanted, just because I'm terrible at design. Like I'm good in other areas, but design, like 2D layout, everything is not my thing. So that's something I hired someone earlier this year, and they did exactly that. They disappeared off the face of the planet, and that was actually through a recommendation from a friend. So, this time around, what I'm doing is I'm actually hiring a firm who's going to look out there and interview, 10, 20, 30 people, do background checks, find the ideal person that I can actually then hire for 3-4 months to develop exactly what I'm after. So, when you get to that stage, it's a little bit different, but initially, just like anyone else, I started out just looking online, trying to hire someone to do specific things. And on the smaller scale, there's Fiverr. And Fiverr, you might laugh at it, like basically Fiverr, it's FIVERR.com. So I'll try and put links to all this stuff. But Fiverr, basically the whole idea of it is that you go online and there's services out there that are $5. So you can get anything done for $5. More recently, it's become a little bit more than that. It's kind of a bit of a loophole now where it's like, I'll do this, but if you want what you're basically trying to get, then you're gonna have to pay the additional, $15 or whatever. But either way, it's gonna end up being really cheap. But for a lot of people, it's like, hey, I need a quick logo done. Here's $5, or whatever. That's actually been really effective. I usually use it for voiceover, which might sound embarrassing now, but like, I think in the future, I probably won't use Fiverr as much now. But in the past, I've used Fiverr a lot. People have actually asked me, like, hey, how do you do the voiceover for whatever product? And, I've been like, I use Fiverr, I paid $5. And usually you're going to get it right the first time. Usually they'll do a few takes. I think for a lot of people, it's just like everything I mentioned. It's more about getting exposure. Because what I'd probably do now is I've got a few different people I've worked with. I'm more than likely going to go and reach out to one of them and say, hey, I want to get a lot more VO done now, like voiceover. So I'll hire you as a proper gig. What are your proper rates? Rather than, here's the $5 to do something very specific. But I think that's a good kind of gateway into getting exposure, getting a lot more. Recently I saw a musician came out with a new music video and ended up in my Vimeo feed. And that was pretty interesting because I recognized him from being on Fiverr, where basically he would offer a service. I think it's more just because he enjoyed doing it, but at the same time, it's good exposure. But he would sing and do the music for whatever kind of jingle you wanted. And he would also record it so you could see him doing the whole thing as well. And I think that was really smart because it gives you a lot more exposure. People are visual, and if they see your face, they're more going to connect the dots than they would hearing you sing. But he would just do like these little gigs here and there for $5, and everyone would use him. So over time, he became pretty popular, and I guess now he's got his own album or at least song coming out. So I think that's really, really cool. I have also seen people get fake testimonials and a lot of other really sketchy shit off of Fiverr as well. And that's something that I will never, ever, ever recommend ever doing, especially if you're selling stuff, because I think one of the biggest things is to get testimonials. Because if you're selling, like, most people are really uncomfortable selling. Like, I could really get into really in depth on this stuff, but basically to get someone to hand over their credit card and pay for something, there's got to be a lot of trust, because they're, especially on the internet, it's very anonymous and very much like, is anything shifty going to happen? What's going on? So for someone to cough up money to give to you for something that they don't know what it's like, it's not physically in their hands, there has to be a lot going on. Like, you got to make someone feel really safe. And I've seen a few times where people are just like, is this legit? Like, most of the time now, if I'm ever to sell something, I do it from my website, because at least that way they're like, okay, it's on Alan's site, like, it's on his domain, it must be legit. It's not like it's coming from some weird website, I don't know what it is. And that's why it's good to also sell through a trusted website. So TurboSquid, stuff like that, at least they're going to recognize the domain, and they're going to feel a lot more comfortable that way than they are going to like some stranger's website and saying, here's my credit card info. These days, everything's really secure. You can't really get screwed, and you just got to make sure it's through an authorized service. So like Stripe, authorized.net, even PayPal, stuff like that are always legit, and so you can go through those. But you still need to build comfort. You need to make sure people know what they're getting. And that's why, like I said, I always feel like over-delivering is a much better approach. It's how I do everything that I do. So with anything, like having testimonials, stuff like that is good, because it means that other real people have tested this product and said that it's great. Usually the first thing I do when I'm buying on Amazon or anything else is I read the reviews. I'm more interested in reading the negative ones, because if someone rates it 1 star and they say it broke, or it didn't arrive on time, then I'm like, okay, that's the worst that could happen. All right, okay, now I feel better. But having those testimonials, having some kind of feedback is really great. On Fiverr, you can get fake testimonials, and I never recommend it, because the minute you do that, and if someone catches on to what you're doing, your trust is gone for life. They are never going to trust you. And, if anyone else ever brings it up, I'm pretty sure they're going to say, man, that shit's fake as shit. So I always think that what is better is to find people that you think are interested in your product, who will test it out. They don't need to be high profile. Later, when you get to that point, if you can get some people with really big names to kind of endorse your stuff, great. But in the beginning, just getting legitimate people that you can say, hey, can I give you my product? Can you test it out? And if you like it, can you write a review or whatever? Something like that is definitely going to go a long way, because if people go onto any site and actually see people with a real photo with real information, especially if they have like a link to their website or something, so they're real, that goes a long way into saying, all right, this stuff's legit and people actually do enjoy it, rather than like, am I just going to get a big bag of sand when I order this thing? So I think that's really important. And on Fiverr, like I said, you can do that stuff. And like, I've actually seen the same people doing testimonials for several people. Like, people just go on Fiverr, put out a testimonial, and then I scroll down someone's page and I'm like, I know that guy, he's on Fiverr. And instantly it's like, next, I'm moving on, instead of like, being ready to cough over money to buy something. I buy a lot of stuff online. I buy a lot of training material, usually not do with visual effects. It's more in other areas, not specifically VFX, but I definitely do buy a lot of stuff. And that's the thing for me. If I can learn in 90 minutes what would take me weeks to learn, I'm all for that. I'm happy to cough up $200 or $1,000. A lot of the courses that I buy are usually around the $2,000 or $3,000 range. They're usually the premium products, but usually those more expensive ones, you're buying from someone who knows what they're doing. They're the authority on that subject, and they can teach you a lot in a very small amount of time. So I look at it as time versus money. I can learn something very quickly than trying to fish for all the information myself. So I think it's very valuable. Anyway, segueing for a little bit, but like Fiverr, like I said, it can be a really good service, but it can also be a gateway to get a lot of exposure in a lot of other areas. I think the biggest thing is just to try all this stuff out and see what works best for you, because there are a lot of different options. One of the big things, and there's so much I could cover on this subject, I can get very specific, like laser focused on what to do about pricing, how to initially get people, how do you get people if you're not on one of these big websites. There's a lot, and that's really where I can actually contribute the most. But I want to kind of give it more of a bird's eye view of more where to start, more where to look into. And one thing I want to get into, though, is going to be more about the trends, looking at tech trends out there. So if you look at stuff that is really popular right now, that I think is definitely where it's better to start to look into. So if you start to get experience in, let's say, 3D printing, you buy a 3D printer just for fun, and you start kind of messing around with it, and you get kind of the whole process nailed down. And after a while, you might say to your friends, like, give me your model. I want to print that model that you just made. After a while, like, you might say, you know what, my process is pretty good. I'm able to get out really good models. Maybe I'm going to look into shipping. Maybe I'll put together a website. From there, I could print people's custom models, or I could print my own and sell them as maquettes or whatever. I could be the next McFarlane or whatever. So I've got friends. I remember one of my friends at Blur 8 years ago bought one of the first 3D printers out there, and he just wanted to make these little toys. And I didn't really understand how you could spend $50,000 at the time for something that, you haven't really got like a big solid business plan, because it was a bit of a risk. But he went ahead and did it. And at least now, like, they're a lot more affordable. I don't know how much a 3D printer is. I'm sure someone can comment in the show notes and give a bit more insight into this. I'd definitely be appreciative if you can. But 3D printing is definitely a pretty fun area. I've got a few friends who've done this. Delcio Gomez, who was on the show from ILM, he actually was setting up a 3D printing business, looking into it at least in Brazil, getting a lot of people's 3D models and doing all that. And it was really cool idea, and I've seen a lot of people kind of go down similar paths. So having that idea, it all just comes from that, where it's like you got some tech, you kind of get used to it, and you're like, okay, well, maybe if I set up a website, I can start to sell my 3D models online. And after time, someone might come to you and say, hey, by the way, I've actually got a 3D model. Can you print it for me? Or, I want to buy someone else's model. Things can organically start to grow. So for you just being, as I always say, you got to be in it to win it. But for you to literally just build a web page and start to kind of mess around with it, just having it there is the first thing you need to do, and then kind of just see where it goes, and don't be too stubborn in terms of letting it grow organically, letting it just see where things will go from initially starting it out. But having some tech that people are kind of trending with right now, that's a good kind of starting point. You look at all the drone stuff. I actually just bought a DJI Inspire 1 the other day, and they're about $3 or $4 grand, including all the gear. And the thing is, for me, it's because there's a bunch of shoots I want to do, and it's a lot cheaper than spending $1,000 for the day to rent a helicopter, and then you go to hire a lot of camera guys, everything else to shoot everything, and then you got to stabilize all your material after you shoot all the plates. Doing camera work with drones has become a lot more standard, and usually you're able to get really stable shots and a lot more control from it. So the way it works is you'll have two controllers. One is for the person flying the drone, and the other person is operating the camera. And together you're able to get a lot of control and a lot of flexibility. So Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese used drones for a lot of photography, and that I think was a big kind of benchmark moment for mainstream Hollywood films doing drone shots. But since then, it's just a very cheap, very cost-effective way of being able to get a lot of aerial shots that usually would be a pain in the butt to do, and a lot of times you can't even shoot in a lot of the areas that you can with a drone. Now, the reason I mention it is because I have friends who own similar gear, and they make $6,000 a day just shooting DP, like director of photography shots, which is a 4-hour day. So 4 hours, $6,000. That's $1,500 an hour you're earning just because you have the gear. So it's one of those big things. Just having the gear is enough to get you work. And you look at all the Red cameras, for instance. If you were to buy a Scarlett or a Dragon, they're expensive, but once you buy them, they're an investment. So just having that camera gear, you can rent it out. You don't even need to be good at shooting. By buying an expensive film camera, you can then have people, once you advertise it, reach out to you like, hey, I want to rent this out for the day. How much do I have to pay? There's actually a truck right outside of my apartment, and it has on the back of it 50footcamerajib.com. Okay. And instantly, like, that guy, I don't need to look at his website or anything. I'm walking down the street. Every single time I see that, I'm going to think, anytime I actually need a 50-foot camera jib, which I don't now have a drone. But again, like, I'm totally kidding. But obviously you have a different gear for different shots, so you don't need to do. But the whole point of this is that just by having that 50-foot camera jib, he's going to get work. And he doesn't even need to go and build a website and do all the advertising. I'm sure he has all that, as well as that sort of thing is going to be more word of mouth. You have your clients, you have all the people that you work with in the industry, and they're going to be the ones to say, okay, yeah, I've got someone for that. And they reach out to them and say, hey, are you available? But especially being in LA or Vancouver, London, wherever, where it's more of a film city, having a car parked in the middle of the street, which is just parked outside of his apartment, that's the visibility that's going to be like, oh, I actually saw something online. I know where to go to get one of those, so we can speak to him. And meanwhile, you might talk about the 50-foot camera jib and end up using him later on for a whole other service because he has other stuff going on too. And maybe it's a girl, I don't know. But the whole point is that having that visibility, buying something that people will need, just by having it means that you might get services. And like I said, even though you have that one thing, it might branch out into them saying, well, can you shoot some stuff for us? Because our second unit needs to have a DP. So are you available? You never know where it can lead. And so having something as a lead magnet to bring people in is really important. So again, VR is definitely one of the big ones right now. Through HoloLens to the Oculus Rift, there's a lot of other tech. Even yesterday, I was talking to someone at lunch, talking about some new tech coming out, and he's already jumping on that. He's already speaking to his friends, trying to get architectural models to actually then be able to utilize so he can start to kind of build around this. So again, you want to look for those things. It's like something new is coming out. How about I figure it out? So just get access to it, and then I can start to learn it and then become an authority on it. Sol Rogers has been on a few podcasts now, and obviously he's become a very big authority when it comes to virtual reality. And that's because he's gone and he's learned it inside out. He's learned everything about it, and then he's gone and innovated on top of that. And it all starts from initially picking up a piece of tech and saying, okay, well, how does this work? Again, a couple other things are holograms are another really big one. Also projecting. So doing projections onto real environments, so you could reproject onto buildings, other things like that. That's definitely becoming a really popular thing that even though it's very popular and very trending, there aren't that many people doing it or have experience with it. So if you were to go and figure that stuff out, put out a bunch of materials so people see that you've done it, instantly whenever they start approaching those jobs, they're going to say, wow, who is out there that could help us get on board with this? You don't need to be the best animator, the best designer, the best anything. If you know this stuff, then that's enough to for you to kind of get positioned doing this. One of my friends worked on Avatar, doing all the volume cube motion capture stuff, then moved back to LA and set up a motion capture studio using the same kind of tech. So instantly everyone's going to his studio to say, hey, we want to get motion capture, we want to use that Avatar technology. So, finding your niche is really important, and you can do all that on the side. I've got a friend of mine who worked at a TV studio doing, all the big creature shows and all that kind of stuff. Then he got into 3D scanning. So bought a few cameras, like maybe I'm guessing 4 or 6 cameras, and started shooting people and then recreating them in 3D using photogrammetry. Now that evolved, and bit by bit he went up to 10 cameras to 20 cameras, and then he started looking at getting clients in who could help with this stuff. Suddenly he's got, every couple of days he's got some new celebrity being shot at his studio. He's quit his full-time job and launched his own company, and he's doing really well with that. And now he's grown to, I think, having the most cameras in the US for doing all this stuff. So he's able to get really accurate 3D scans in like very small amount of time, because he started out tinkering with a couple of cameras and then kind of grew on that and took the idea further and further. And of course, by doing that and by getting exposure, by putting your name out there, even when it's a full-time job, a part-time job, you're just doing it on the side, over time, people are going to say, and this happens a lot, hey, do you know anyone who does scanning? Like on God of War, we needed someone to scan, and I wanted to go to him, but he was just starting out at that point, so it wasn't really an option. But since then, I've put him in contact with Blur, a few other studios, and they've used his services for a lot of stuff. So even word of mouth, things can grow, and that is what will help you grow into a full-blown studio rather than being just a part-time job. And that way, suddenly you're doing something that you really love instead of more just doing it for fun or slaving away at your staff job. So a couple other things I'm just going to touch on. Again, like I said, this episode is more about just kind of throwing out some ideas, giving you a perspective of what's possible. And then from there, if any of you are interested, I'm more than happy to kind of laser focus in a little bit and talk about some of this stuff. I've helped a few people make $100,000 launches, as in they've gone and made products and launched them and made a couple $100,000 within like a 2-week window. Again, very niche products, very specific, not necessarily in visual effects in other industries, but any of that stuff is possible. You just got to figure out the best way to go about doing it. So of course, Photoshop, you can also sell your work either doing merchandise, stuff like that. So t-shirt printing, there's a lot of websites out there. T-shirts are definitely a very competitive industry, in my opinion. So I don't think it's the most profitable. I've met a few people who are wanting to start their own t-shirt company, and I kind of roll my eyes a little bit because I don't think it's too sustainable, just because a lot of companies have just decided to go and do it on the mass side of things, and so you can't really fight or compete as much as you would. But doing writing for magazines, I think, is very important, and you can make some good money from that. So again, talking to 3D World magazine, a lot of other ones, there's also online magazines, but a lot of these websites and magazines you can go to and you can write articles for them, maybe make $800 or $400, whatever, for it. You could do feature tutorials, so you could write up tutorials for them, and that could be as much as like $1,500. So again, you do that in a couple of hours. I've done plenty of those in just a few hours, and you can make a lot of money on the side doing that. So you do 2 a month or whatever, that's good money. It's going to definitely help the bank a lot. Selling your artwork, if you're more Photoshop especially, selling your artwork on like DeviantArt, place like that, that's a good way to get exposure, plus they'll actually sell your work. I've actually got 1 or 2 prints in my apartment which are DeviantArt posters that are framed and put up, and I don't know what the split is. I assume it's pretty low is probably what I'm guessing. But that's a way to get some exposure and also maybe make a little bit of side income and get your artwork in a few people's houses. The other big things are doing public speaking, so going to keynotes, masterclasses, stuff like that. So you could go to a college, and actually speaking at colleges, again, is a good way to make a bit of extra cash. The money is always going to vary, but again, really good exposure. And I think a lot of these are ways to kind of get more attention, and that will lead to extra stuff. But if you go and do a talk, let's say at SIGGRAPH or even at a small conference or even at a college, you can then record that talk and then go and sell it. Go to Udemy or one of those websites, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But you could then potentially sell the talk or use it to write up notes and kind of, move on and kind of build it up from there. So, I mean, there's lots of different stuff you can do with that. But public speaking and doing talks, teaching, those are all things that you can do at nighttime. You can do a night class on whatever outside of your work to make a bit of extra cash. And again, it's good exposure to have a few things like that on your resume as well. I don't think it's really going to help you get a film job, but it does look good in certain areas if you're able to say, I spoke at university or whatever, especially on visas, things like that as well, which I know is a popular subject. As you can tell, I'm picking up the pace a little bit here because I have to run. But consulting is another one. And again, the more you latch onto a specific bit of tech, which is really popular and also kind of new. And I've mentioned that about Bifrost and a lot of other things, new features that are coming out. If you position yourself as the authority on something, then you can definitely get a lot of attention from that. But at the same time with tech, if you go and buy yourself a new drone, if you go and buy yourself new camera gear, if you go and get access to VR, whatever it's going to be, you get familiar with it and then start posting stuff everywhere. People are going to go, whoa, that's so cool. Contact you and say, hey, we've got a job. Is it possible for you to either talk on the phone for an hour or two? We'll pay you really good money for that few hours of chatting, or can we fly you out and put you in a hotel and have you just sit around and tell us if we're doing this right? All that stuff happens, so just be aware of that. Same thing with like cloud rendering and everything. The more you kind of get into all this stuff, the more you can carve out a niche for yourself. Doing LiDAR scanning, any new tech coming out. If you see some SIGGRAPH tech paper, and this happens a lot with software development. Like I look back at Afterburn, which is the developers of Fume Effects. All that initially was a SIGGRAPH paper on ray marching. They went and got the paper and then wrote it for Macs. And there's a lot of times that's what people do. They see an idea. Even Rayfire, for instance, was based on one of my friends. Actually, he's going to be on the podcast soon. He's one of the supervisors from ILM. He developed a tool just for fun, which did like bullet impacts and stuff like that. And then another one of my friends, Mir Vadim, he went and took the idea. He asked permission first, but he went and took the idea and then turned it into a full-blown software product, which then, as I mentioned about organically seeing where it goes, he introduced some fracturing as like a secondary thing. And then the fracturing became more popular to the point where the gunfire stuff is now not in the product anymore from what I recall. So you can see how something started out as one product, and then that reason for the product to exist got eliminated because it organically grew into something else. And that's what I mean by you need to be in it to win it, but you need to initially get things going and then to see what happens. But if you don't initially do that, then you never know. And I've been coaching a few people recently with a few of their own pretty big services and things like that they're trying to get off the ground. And one of the big things I see really consistently is people are such perfectionists that they never actually release anything. They'll spend 6 months or 12 months working on something because it has to be perfect. And so they never actually get it out there. And by that stage, someone else has already beat them to the punchline. So it's better to get something out there and then revise. And that way you get customer feedback as well. I put out a course last year. It was a programming course and it did really well. I actually only had it open for 2 weeks and I spent 6 or 7 months on this thing. And the content is great. I wasn't happy with the delivery of it. And rather than have it out there, I decided I'm going to take it down until I figure out what to do with it. And this thing is a 6-month course and the content is really solid. I felt like at the time I didn't quite execute it exactly how I want. The main thing was I was working on Equalizer while I was developing this. And while I'm doing Equalizer, there's so much content I was developing for the course that I kept saying, wow, I need this technology, these tools in my movie. So I kept going from the training environment, in other words, having all the directory structure based on the training, to needing to work on it in the movie at the same time. So I kept kind of swapping back and forth, and it just made it, for me, it felt a little bit inconsistent. So I kind of just wanted to build it without actually being in a production environment at the exact same time, just so I can focus entirely on it. But that's one of the things that you get something out there, and I had a few hundred people roll through it, nothing but great results. In fact, one of the guys, he's in my mentorship now. Actually, I guess it's a good thing. He actually posted it today saying that today, 12 months ago, so it's 1 year ago from today, was when he first did the course that I just mentioned, and how much it changed his life and his career and where everything's gone from there. So I guess it was exactly around this time last year, which is true. Actually, it was July that got launched. So I think it's better to get something out there, see what people say about it, see how it organically evolves. But at the same time, you don't want to put out a pile of crap. You got to make sure that you stand by it, you're happy with it. Just don't hold off and not ever release something just because you're like, no, I got to get this thing right and this thing here, where it really won't matter. It's more about getting version 1 out and then kind of evolving it as you go. Okay, so the final thing I'm just going to say, like I said, I just want to give more of a bird's eye view of a few different ways you can make money. And obviously, doing training, it's pretty oversaturated, but you can do that. Selling models, selling content that way, I think is a really good way to do it, because you're probably making stuff in your spare time anyway, so why not repurpose it and sell it to make a bit more money? But I feel like that is going to, in the long run, be better for you, because you'll be able to use it as a gateway to actually get jobs, because people will see the quality of work you're putting out and they might need a custom solution. I see it so often, and people will, rather than buy the model, or they do buy the model, they decide, hey, we actually want to hire you instead. Are you available? Because we need it custom made. And so I find that's a really good way to kind of get your name out there, and also get clients and people reaching out to you specifically. So a couple other things I'm just going to mention in terms of selling stuff. So I can definitely talk about pricing and a lot of other stuff if this is something you guys are interested in. Like I said, this is a very taboo subject. I wasn't quite sure whether or not to do it, but I figure it's something that I think a lot of you can benefit from. And it's something that I've been doing for a very long time. And more recently, in the last couple of years, I've been doing it on a much larger scale outside of visual effects and outside of 3D, 2D, everything else. However, I will just say that if you're trying to decide, should I sell on my own site or should I use one of the other sites out there? Because if you're doing training, let's say, then going to TurboSquid or going to Digital Tutors or CG Society or Nomon or whatever, those places can host your material. Obviously, they're only accepting certain caliber of people, but you can go and do courses through them. But again, the split is usually about 50-50. So it means that if you were to make, let's say, $200 course, they're going to get $100 from it. Okay, so that's the downside. The upside is that usually they're going to have a lot more reach than you will. So you look at their Twitter, their followers on Facebook, everything else, you can get a good idea of okay, well, they have this many people. Well, then maybe I should go and go through them, so that way I can get more exposure and they'll do all the selling for me. For a long time, I used CG Society. I helped them build up the workshops in the beginning. So I've been with CG Society for 10 years or longer now, actually longer than 10 years, doing a lot of content, workshops, that sort of thing. And I always enjoyed doing that. However, when I decided to launch my own stuff was basically because I felt like I'd gone to a point where I had more of a following in terms of what I was trying to do than they were able to reach. But at the same time, I also felt like the six-week courses or whatever it was weren't enough time for people to really learn, because I would still be doing really high-level content, but to cram it down someone's throat in 6 weeks wasn't really ideal. I always felt, and I always said in the lessons, I wish these were going for longer. And that was something we always polled everyone for. Do you wish the courses were longer? Because everyone was 100% happy. But of course, they're going to say, man, I wish I had more time, just because, it's so much to indulge in. So that's why I decided I wanted to do my own thing, because that way I could go and do a 6-month course or a 3-month course, or even what I'm doing at the moment, 1 year long courses where I'm meeting and talking, doing live interactions, answering questions. And I find that to be way more beneficial because I could be in a live lesson and someone says, hey, I was rendering my stuff. It was taking 6 hours a frame, and I can live jump into Max or Maya and say, okay, well, I changed these 3 or 4 settings. This is what I do, and I get them down to about 3 minutes a frame. So these settings, as well as a few other ones out here, these are the things you need to change. You need to get drastically different results. So always keep it between these values. You'll get really fast renders. 20 seconds, 30 seconds of that time can save them weeks of work. So that's really beneficial, I find, to kind of have that interaction. And that's the other thing I wanted to get onto in a moment. But basically, using other people to sell your stuff, I think, is really valuable in the beginning because it'll help you get exposure. Plus, your name gets put next to theirs if you're trying to build your name, stuff like that. But at the same time, they'll be doing all the work. So you mightn't get all the money, but forget about the money part and focus on, okay, I'm able to meet and talk to a lot of people. This is really cool. I get to get exposure that I usually wouldn't get. If you do have a massive following, you're Raf Grizzetti or someone with a big name, then maybe you should do it on your own because you already have a big following, probably bigger than a lot of those training companies. So why not do it yourself? And that way you can reap all the rewards, but it means you got to put in the time. Like whenever I do a launch, I spend about 6 or 7 weeks doing the launch full time before I actually launch a product. Okay, and that sounds insane, but I'm really particular about it, and I've gotten really good at doing it. But the downside is that it's a full-time gig. It's probably the most intense part of the year that I have. So when I launched the mentorship in May, I spent a good 2 months prior to that getting everything ready, and that was full-time, and there was a lot of late nights and a lot of stress. So most people don't do that, but again, for me, this is something that I want to do right, and I also I'm very careful about who I let into the mentorships. I also want to make sure that it's the best experience it can be, and I want to make sure that everything goes really smoothly. So it's really important. But with all these websites, whether you're selling assets, whether you're doing 3D models, whether you're doing articles, whatever it is, doing it with other companies is definitely a good way to start out. You're going to get a lot more exposure than you would by yourself. And then later on, you can evolve and do stuff for yourself if you want to. In terms of pricing, again, that's a very big subject, surprisingly. But you can either go for 2 things. You can either go and charge a really high rate, but you're probably going to get less sales and more of a knee-jerk no reaction. Or you can go more into the pricing of, let's say $19 for a lesson or $29, whatever. I remember Anzi, who I did an episode with, Anselm, he was saying to me one time that for him, he found doing tutorials, $12 was the magic number. If he did that, people would buy it. And I'll back that up with the psychology behind it. Basically, there's less risk. So people are like, all right, it's $12, I'll buy that, no problem. Rather than it being like, that's a big investment, I got to think about that, and then going away and never returning. So you really got to think about what works best for the type of audience you're trying to get and what you're delivering. Again, the courses that I usually run, if it's a year-long course, if you were to look at universities, what they would charge, usually it's about $30,000. So I usually charge the exact same amount that a lot of the websites like Gnome One, CG Society, FX PhD, a lot of the other ones charge for their small courses, like 6 weeks or whatever. I'll charge that for 6 months or whatever it's going to be. So again, that's me trying to do the over delivery, because I'd rather put out something that I'm going to be confident and can stand behind for the rest of my life than do something that, a few months later I'm like, ooh. And that's why that one course I mentioned, even though the content was really solid and I never had any negative feedback, it was still one of those things that I felt like I really want to make this polished. I really want to make it perfect. I really want it to be able to stand the test of time. So I'm going to stop letting people in, and I still interact with everyone who's in it, but I'm not going to let others in until I've kind of revised it into version 2. So, it's definitely a learning experience. And since then, I've made that kind of my mantra, is to make the best quality I could ever put out, that for the rest of my life, I'll be able to say like, yeah, this really holds up. Now, finally, I'm just going to mention, if whichever way you want to go, there's always the advantage of, passive income. And I'm doing air quotes here, but I definitely try to do this a lot I put out Fume Effects Core Fundamentals, which was a 40-hour DVD. I put it out a few years ago. And again, I think this is one of the best products I've ever made. I spent 2 months working on it day and night. I had no life at all. I literally locked myself in a room, and the initial way it came into be is I wanted to put out a new DVD on Fume and all the new features. And initially I started doing it, and I decided, you know what, rather than do this and then another one and another one, I'm just going to make one that literally is going to teach you everything you could ever know about this product. And so I went through every single thing, tore it inside out. It was extremely in depth. And that, again, is kind of what I stand behind, which is I want to be able to do something that I'm always going to be proud of and happy with. And even now, I still feel like it's pretty relevant, even though it's a few years old. But one of the big things I learned at the time was I built a whole automated machine around it. This was definitely a big learning curve for me in terms of like e-commerce and building kind of a passive income machine. And so, again, this is 5 years ago now, but I love the idea of like, you know what, I'm going to make this product and I'm going to automate everything. I spent 2 months making it, and I spent 1 month building this entire system around it, where the whole system was completely automated. From initially when you try and buy it, you can't buy it right away. You have to go through an email funnel. From there, eventually you get a chance to buy it. And once you buy it, you get all these follow-ups with additional content. I kept giving all this extra free content to people who were signing up. I wanted to really make it a really great experience, but I also set it up in a way that was completely automated. So that way, once I set it up, I never had to do anything. And it was a really amazing experience to do. I remember I was in San Francisco for a GDC, it's the Game Developer Conference, and I was sitting at a bar, talking with friends, and I kept checking my phone, seeing money coming in, and it was like a really cool experience to kind of see that happen. Again, I've always found like selling DVDs, tutorials, it hasn't been the most profitable thing, but still getting, it was making sales and it was doing really well. It was definitely the most profitable DVD I've ever sold. Now, by doing that, it was really great because I'd built this automated machine, and I'm like, great, I never have to touch it. It's going to keep selling, and it's awesome. And you could put ads and everything else around it, and you've got a 360-degree selling machine built, automated, the whole thing. The thing about that, I enjoyed it, and I think that what I sold was really good. And like I said, it still sells now. And I have not changed it since when I first set it up. It still sells to this day. I still get sales on it. And, I still think that it's good. Like, there are products of mine that I have had and I've since taken down just because I feel like, they've gotten a bit dated over time. And if I wanted to keep selling it, I would want to update it. But this is definitely one that I still feel to this day it's really relevant. And even the other day, I was referring people to check it out just because there were certain things they were asking about. That being said, for me, after a while, I didn't like the idea of just this automated way of doing things, because I like interacting with people. I like to be able to answer their questions. And that's kind of where the evolution of doing the mentorship came from, was that people can pick up a product and try and learn it. Doing a training DVD, suddenly they get, in this case, 40 hours. Most DVDs are about 2 hours or 3 hours at most. I've seen some that are 1 hour, so it's 40 is huge, right? And that was the over delivery again, but 40 hours of content, you've got a lot of information, but there's still going to be times when you're like, cool, that was really great, but what if I was trying to do this? Like, even the other day, I got a lesson in the mentorship. There's something like 250 lessons in the mentorship. Each one's about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Some are longer. One lesson is 20 hours in the mentorship. So, as you can imagine, there's literally hundreds of hours in there. And one of them is a gigantic 20-foot sandstorm, not 20-foot, 200-foot. And one of the artists wanted to do it, but they wanted to make it into a avalanche instead. And I really encourage that, to kind of make your own spin on things. So that's kind of cool to have your own spin on things, which I really encourage. The thing is that if you're doing it by yourself, there's no one there to really hold your hand. And having access to someone who's, either on a forum or whatever, who made the content, is able to say, that's really cool, look at your work and say, why don't you try this? And that one little message, post, or even on a live webinar can change everything, because it's like, oh, wow. And like, I was doing that. I was actually bringing up references of real avalanches and saying, what they should be changing to get the exact result they're after. that's all really beneficial to getting the results that you want. And for me, I've just enjoyed that. And by doing this whole automated thing, I didn't really kind of get that satisfaction of getting to interact and know these people. Like I said, like I've actually met a lot of the people from the mentorship. Every industry drink we have, there's people flying in from other places or showing up. And even when I was in Paris, I met up with a huge group of the guys who were coming in from different parts of Europe. And, you build these friendships that last on and on and on. And I've got students from 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago who are now in the mentorship. Years later, they continue to do all the courses. And I've got some of my old students who are now lecturing, doing Houdini and other masterclasses for CEG Society and all the other big ones as well. So it's kind of cool just to kind of see people evolve and to actually be a part of their life and of their career. And again, doing the podcast, everything else, I've gotten a chance to kind of be a part of that too, which has just been so rewarding for me to kind of get to interact with so many people. And I love that. I love to get emails from you guys and get to see what you guys are doing, the successes you have, everything. And that comes here as well. It's just having that disconnect. Selling stuff is cool, but I still think that if you forget about the money aspect and you see it as, okay, this is a way for me to get a little bit back, but I'm doing this for other reasons. I'm doing it because I get to network, I get to build my name, my brand, to meet new people, to open up new doors. Whatever your motivations are, I think it's always going to be better to do it for legitimate reasons. There's nothing wrong with making money, by the way. Like, I think that's definitely one of the key things I should say, is that you shouldn't ever be apologetic for making money. But at the same time, I think that you've still got to have the right mentality behind it. And like I said, I've done a lot of coaching and also masterminds with some really big groups of people, everyone from people starting out to millionaires in other industries. And that's going to be one big learning point for me is, you've got people who are really legitimate. They love what they do and they kind of just want to show other people or take it to the next level, or they feel like they've found something they're really good at and they want to share that information. And then you've got the other people who are kind of more kind of sleazy and scammy. They really want to, make that quick buck. And those are the people that at the end of the day, they might make a few dollars, but they'll fizzle out because in the long run, their heart's not in it. And as soon as they're not getting the reward that they want, they're going to move on to the next thing. And it's not really a legitimate, genuine thing that they're giving. So I always think that it's better to find something that you love and you care about and you want to share this information, because people can tell when you're making that content, whatever it is, whether it's a 3D model, whether it's a Photoshop asset or an action. But like, if you're doing it because you did something cool and you basically want to like put it out there for others, and yeah, why not make some money from it? Like, I think, and I do this all the time, obviously put stuff out for free, but there's always going to be some stuff that for me to do it, I need to take time off. I need to spend a few months doing it. So obviously you need to kind of pay the bills and still make a living while you're doing that. I think that's always the better approach to do it than to just say, you know what, I'm going to make this cool thing and I'll make a shitload of money, and I'm going to do all this like sneaky stuff to try and get people in using spam that I put everywhere, and that links to an ad that links to some fake endorsements and stuff that I put on my webpage to try and trick people into giving me the cash or whatever the hell. Like I said, just keep it legit and, make genuine stuff. If you make good stuff, people will want to buy it. If you make a pile of crap that you're rushing out to try and make a quick buck, it's always going to look like that at the end of the day. So, and the other thing too, and I will always say this because for me, this has always been the case. You want those repeat customers. Again, I've been really lucky because I've ran my previous courses and I've got students still buying all my stuff. Even the other day, it was really great that one of the guys was in our private chat room during a webinar, and he's saying that, he bought the last 6 things, and there's actually several of those people from the same classes from a few years before that. And they're all saying like, yeah, like I've been buying all of Alan's stuff. It's been so cool to kind of do this stuff and kind of keep evolving and learning more skills. And, I love that because it makes me feel like, okay, great. I'm not putting out shit. I'm actually putting out stuff that people have continued to buy over and over and over because the quality is where it should be, rather than, okay, like this was good and the rest were crap or whatever. It's putting out quality stuff continuously is really, really important, really vital. And I think that's the better way to learn this. There's an article by Kevin Kelly, which is 1,000 True Fans. It's a really interesting article, as well as Seth Godin has written one on tribes. This is something that you can apply to your artwork, to a lot of different things. I will try and put these in the show notes later tonight if I'm not too drunk in my hotel room. But the whole philosophy is that if you find your audience, the people that follow your stuff, that you've managed to make that connection with, and you're able to continuously give great value, great content to them in their lives, then they're always going to be around and they're always going to want to follow your work and consume your stuff. And I think that's really important because it means that if you put out great content and you make it always nothing but the best, you don't ever let the quality suffer, you just focus on making it good and make it specific to the people that you've chosen, or they've chosen you, I should say, then you'll always have those people around. And that's all you need, is that 1,000 people to be able to succeed and to actually exist. So I know this episode has been very sporadic and a little bit different to what I've always talked about. Like I said, it's a subject that a lot of people have different associations with. Money is always one of those things that some people are, a little weird about. But I think that, I've talked about this, about negotiations and with your salary, everything else. I think it's important to just be unapologetic about this. Like, we're out here to make a living. We want to do it for hopefully all the right reasons. For me, I want to create freedom in my life. I don't want to have to work when I'm 50 in a stressful environment to make a living. I'd rather do it because I'm passionate about it. And I think that all of us are kind of out there to do the same things, or at least that will become a more of an end goal at a certain point. But maybe we're still trying to make our thumbprint and get ourselves out there. But ultimately, money creates freedom. And by having a side income, whether it is going to be, selling assets, selling lessons, writing articles, doing t-shirt print or 3D printing, or catching on to the next big niche, such as VR or whatever you're going to get into, I think that these are ways that you can create a little bit more freedom in your life to eventually break off and do the things that you want to do. And who knows, maybe they'll become your second train and they'll eventually be the full-time career that you kind of move into because you allowed it to have that organic growth that I talked about. So I'm going to leave it there. There's lots more. Believe me, there's so much I can contribute to this, but I just want to keep it kind of more broad right now. But if this is something that interests you, I do encourage you to let me know, because otherwise I probably won't be revisiting this too much, just because it's kind of different to what I intend to be focusing on. But if enough of you say, you know what, that was really interesting, I'd love to know, like, what are the 5 steps to get started? I want to do this. How do I get a following? How do I sell stuff? How do I even do the technical hands-on stuff, like set up a shopping cart, or give me an email template to email lynda.com or Udemy or whoever else to get a course going, or even how do I get guest posts or whatever else. Like, I can definitely do a lot of stuff around that. But again, it's such a different area to what I typically want to focus on that it's only if I have enough people share interest in this. So one last thing I'm going to do, if you're interested, I'm going to put up a PDF file, which is just going to be a list, like an overview of different ways that you can make money online. And I'll give links to everything. And it's more like a big cheat sheet on how to make money as a side income. So if you go to alanmckay.com/passive, so that's PASSIVE, passive, you can download the cheat sheet there, and they'll have a lot of really cool information in it. Finally, a couple other things. I would love if you guys can leave a review. If you go to show notes, by the way, just alanmckay.com/44, so that's 44. You can read all the show notes, links to a lot of this stuff, but I'll leave a link there to leave a review on iTunes. If you can do that, it'd be so appreciative for me for you to do that. So if you can, just leave a review, and I'm running a contest, which I'll be announcing the prize soon, but I will be ending the contest later on in August. So if you go to alanmckay.com/44, click on the link to iTunes, just leave a review on iTunes basically, but make sure you put hashtag VFX1. And that will let me know that this is for the contest, just so that way I can call someone out as the winner at the end of it. So just go to iTunes and leave a review and hashtag VFX1. I'd be really grateful for that. Thank you so much. I'd really like to get as much exposure for this podcast as I can. I always do these for free and end up usually putting about a day and a half, if not a couple of weeks sometimes, into a lot of these episodes. And I'd really love just to kind of get as much exposure as I can for it. Right now, we have about 200,000 listeners. It's usually ranked in the top 20 on iTunes in the career section, although that does fluctuate sometimes. I've seen it go all the way to number 3, or number 2 actually, but then all the way to number 200 sometimes. So yeah, I don't know how the hell their ranking system works, but I do know that reviews and listens definitely are a big one in there. So again, I'm always going to be so grateful for that. So thank you again. Now, finally, the last thing I'm just going to mention is I've been doing a few solo episodes and I've really enjoyed doing these, and I've got a lot more coming up. I've also got a lot of interviews which I've been holding off just to put these couple out. So the next few episodes I want to do are going to be not just about visual effects and everything else. I want to start to broaden this a little bit, where I'm definitely going to be bringing in some really big names in design, some really big names in any industry basically. So one of the first ones I'm going to be bringing in is going to be Mark Simonetti, who has been in the industry for a very long time. I've actually got one of his books autographed by him sitting right next to me. Thanks for that, Mark. Mark's amazing. He's got a really talented background. You'd recognize his work from all the Game of Thrones books because he's done the covers, as well as working for EA, Sony, Activision. He's tied to a lot of film work, doing movie posters, you name it. He's definitely one of the biggest names out there and really talented, really awesome guy. I had the pleasure of hanging out with him in Paris earlier this year, and we hit it off instantly. I think we both like beer too much, but so I'll be doing a interview next episode with him. I've also got Ash Thorpe, who you recognize from a lot of different concept designs for very high profile feature films, as well as a lot of title sequences. He's done so much shit. This guy is amazing. So that, as well as Chuck Woskowitz. I can never say Chuck's name. I've known Chuck since 2004, ever since I first stepped into Blur. He was the lead concept designer, pretty much he did run the concept department for Blur Studio. I'm sure you've seen a lot of his artwork everywhere. If you go to Comic-Con, you can wait in a very big line to get his artwork signed and autographed for you, and he's a really phenomenal guy. So I'm going to be doing another episode with him. There's some really cool names coming up. There's still another episode I want to do. There's actually a few, finally, female artists I want to be interviewing, because so far I didn't actually realize it until not too long ago, but it's been 100% male interviews so far, and that's not been intentional, but it's just usually been my network so far has been like, a bit of VR, a bit of Blur, a bit of whatever. And one thing that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I have mentioned it before, was I want to do a roundtable with a few people in the industry that I really respect and also think would be able to contribute a lot. And I actually had this idea at the very beginning of the podcast to bring on a couple of women in particular that have such a huge amount of influence as well as experience in the industry, that I thought would just be a great kind of insight. Because I still think that even though, for the most part, depending on what industry you're in, it's pretty balanced at this point. I mean, definitely more men than women, but it does even out in terms of some areas, some cities, some countries. I noticed there was a lot more women in 3D in the US than I ever experienced in Australia, although that's changed again since I left Australia. But initially starting out, I think that it was definitely more of a boys' club in the beginning, and that's changed over time too. But then going to France, going to certain other countries and specifically cities around the world, you'll see the shift quite drastically. But it's kind of good that over time it's definitely changed, and it's evened out a lot more than it was like 20 years ago. But I guarantee, and this is why I'd love to get some more perspective on this, but I guarantee it's always going to be a lot more difficult and a very different experience for women in the industry than it is for men, because especially there's a lot more men, and you get a bunch of guys together. I think that the math is pretty much the more guys, the more they're going to act like guys multiplied when they're around each other. So, but I think that it's definitely going to be just like a really good take to get the insight from a few people who've been around for a long time doing this. On top of that, there's just a few people I've wanted to interview for quite a while that are at a few really big studios that have got a lot of experience that I think would just be cool to have on anyway. I know that Maggie O, who's over at NVIDIA, I'm going to be doing a session with her doing SIGGRAPH, and she came from, I think, Stanford. I'm pretty sure it was Stanford. She did engineering, I believe, over there, went to ILM. Really, really smart girl who's done everything. Since then went to work for Microsoft and now works at NVIDIA, leading up one of the tech departments. And she's extremely talented and just has a lot of insight to share. And we always bond over rum. We're both on Priest for a long time working on that project. And the entire team would be buying bottles of bourbon, scotch, and rum to try and outdo each other, trying to get the best stuff. So it's always been a blast whenever I work with any of the San Francisco groups. But what I have coming up is going to be a lot more solo episodes. I've got a lot of really great stuff, but I'm also going to be interviewing not just 3D visual effects, that sort of thing, but actually make it a little bit more broader. So no matter what industry you're in, you're still going to benefit a lot from this. So there's a lot of compositors, there's a lot of motion graphics designers. There's actually a few pretty big name directors that I'm going to be bringing on the show to talk about everything from how to get your short film or your feature film picked up, as well as the process, and just a lot of insight that comes from being on the director's end of things, where you're the visionary and you've got to communicate that with a lot of creatives like artists, designers, 3D, everything else. At the same time, like I said, there's a women roundtable I'd like to do. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be really beneficial for everyone. But there's also going to be obviously designers that I'm bringing in, such as Chuck, Ash, and Mark, amongst others, as well as more tech-orientated ones. Immigration, like I said, I wanted to bring on a couple of immigration lawyers, as well as HR, like human resources, just to kind of see more the hiring end of things, especially to do with visas and that sort of thing. So, I mean, there is so much I've been working on really hard to get going, and I'm really excited about it. So more to come, but episode 45 will be with Mark. I'm really looking forward to that, and more stuff coming. But please let me know what you think of this episode. Leave a comment or a better review. I'll buy you a beer. And but more importantly, I'd love to know if this is something that really benefits you. Then I will definitely do more focused ones on this subject, as well as if it's something that really gets a big reception. Maybe I can put together a masterclass on how to launch a product, how to literally step by step get whatever you're doing and be able to take it online, get followers, and sell and make money online doing that. I hope you found this to be beneficial. Again, this is all in the sake of helping your journey to get your dream job going, to get into the area that you want. I think that having a bit of side income gives you that freedom to take risks, so that way you can eventually start to move into the areas that you really want to do. So it's all about creating that freedom to go after your dreams, your passions, and ultimately your dream job. So like I said, if you want to get the download, the PDF cheat sheet, go to www.alanmckay.com/passive, PASSIVE. Okay, that's it, guys. I'm going to hop in an Uber and head downtown and get to the shoot.